Chapters 6 and 7 of Problems in American Democracy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. Problems in American Democracy by Thames Williamson. Part 2. American Economic Principles. A. Economics of American Industry. Chapter 6. The Nature of American Industry. 52. Magnitude of American Industry. In colonial times, the major part of American industry was concentrated along the Atlantic seaboard. Today, it extends over a large part of the continent. A century and a half ago, our industrial system was still a relatively simple one, giving rise to few pressing problems of national importance. At the present time, it is a vast and complicated affair, closely bound up with many of the most vital problems which confront American democracy. These activities, which are commonly grouped under the head of American industry, are so numerous and so varied that a description of all of them would carry us beyond the limits of this chapter. Nevertheless, it is important that we secure some understanding of these activities. A few pages may profitably be spent, therefore, in discussing certain basic facts of American industry. 53. Favorable location of the United States. Let us commence by noting that the location of the United States is favorable to the development of industry. Of the two American continents, the northern has the greater natural advantages. Each continent is roughly in the form of a triangle, with the apex or smaller end pointing southward. But whereas the larger end of South America triangle is within the tropic zone, and only the tapering end is within the more favorable temperate zone, the greater part of the North American triangle is within the temperate zone. With regard to location for world trade, the northern continent again has the advantage. The ports of South America face a relatively empty ocean on the west and the little developed continent of Africa on the east. The ports of North America, in addition to being more numerous and more suitable for commerce than those of the southern continent, face the teeming Orient on the west and the great markets of Europe on the east. Moreover, the United States occupies the choicest portions of the North American continent. Our neighbor Canada has a cold and snowbound frontier on her north, while on our south, Mexico and the Central American countries lie near the tropics. The heart of temperate America, on the other hand, is included within the territory of the United States. 54. Population. Scarcely less important than the favorable location of the United States is the character of the people occupying the country. From less than 4 million in 1790, our population has increased so rapidly that in 1920 there were 105,710,620 people within the bounds of continental United States. As the population has increased, it has spread over the Appalachians into the great Mississippi Basin and westward to the Pacific Ocean. Accompanying the increase and westward spread of the population has come a greater variety of racial types. Although our population was varied in colonial times, the great majority of the settlers were from the British Isles and northwestern Europe. In the latter part of the 19th century, immigration from northern Europe declined, and more immigrants began to come from southern and southeastern Europe. So universal has been the attraction of America that our present population includes elements from every important country in the world. From the industrial standpoint, the dominant characteristics of this composite American people are energy and versatility. 55. National wealth. Generations of industrious people have helped to make the United States the wealthiest nation in the world. It has been estimated that in 1850 our national wealth amounted to $8 billion. By 1900, the remarkable progress of American industry has increased this figure to more than $88 billion. In 1912, our wealth was probably in excess of $180 million. Industrial and financial disturbances during the period of the World War make later estimates hazardous, Nevertheless, it is interesting to note that in 1921, the wealth of the United States was estimated as being between $350 billion and $400 billion. According to this estimate, the wealth of this country exceeded, in 1921, the combined wealth of Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Belgium. In weighing the value of this comparison, however, we must take into consideration the heavy destruction of wealth in Western Europe because of the World War. 56. What the American people are doing. A large percentage of the inhabitants of the United States are engaged in some form of productive work. According to the most recent estimates, there are approximately 50 million persons, male and female, over 10 years of age, engaged in gainful occupations in this country. Of these, about 14 million are engaged in agriculture and allied industries, while more than 11 million are busy in manufacturing pursuits. Almost 4 million are found in some form of trade, and another 4 million are employed in domestic and personal service. Transportation, clerical work, and professional callings utilize the services of several additional million. The great majority of those employed in the American industry are men, although the number of women in industry is steadily increasing. Children have been found in industrial pursuits since colonial times, but of recent years there is a growing movement to restrict or prohibit the employment of children in gainful occupations. 57. Forests and minerals. The natural resources of the United States play a large part in our industrial life. 1/4 of the territory of the United States is still covered with timber. We are abundantly supplied with coal and iron, the two most important industrial minerals. Our coal deposits outrank, both in quantity and in quality, those of any other country. Iron is found in most of the states in the Union, the high-grade deposits of the Lake Superior area being of special importance. We produce more than half of the world's supply of copper, which, after coal and iron, is the most important industrial mineral. Our supply of petroleum and natural gas is large, and, in spite of the waste which has characterized our use of these important commodities, our production of both is still great. Gold, silver, zinc, lead, and phosphates are produced in the United States in large quantities. Indeed, we have ample supplies of practically all of the minerals of importance to industry, except platinum, tin, and nickel. 58. Agriculture. Until very recently, at least, agriculture has been by far our most important industry. Of the 2 billion acres comprising continental United States, approximately half are under cultivation. In most sections of the country, the quality of the soil is good, and rainfall is ample. We have long led the world in the value of farm crops grown. Our production of wheat, corn, oats, barley, rye, and dairy products totals an enormous figure. The steady enclosure of lands formerly used for grazing stock is restricting our production of food animals, but we are still important as a producer of meats. Most of the world's tobacco is grown in this country. The world's supply of cotton is derived mainly from the southern United States. Finally, our soil is of such variety and our climate so diversified that the danger of a general crop failure is slight. A loss in one part of the country is almost certain to be offset by good crops in another. 59. Manufacturing. In colonial times, American manufacturers were subjected to more or less restraint by Great Britain, but after the Revolution, these industries entered upon a period of free and rapid development. Modern machinery was introduced rapidly after 1800. A large-scale production was developed, transportation was fostered, and larger markets were supplied with the products of American manufacturers. Particularly since the Civil War has the importance of our manufacturers increased. This increase has been due chiefly to the large-scale production of foodstuffs, including meats and flour, textiles, iron and steel products, shoes, chemicals, and agricultural machinery. According to recent census figures, it would appear that we are passing from a predominantly agricultural life to a stage in which manufacturing is of relatively greater importance. 60. Transportation and communication. The physical geography of the United States encourages the development of adequate means of transportation and communication. The St. Lawrence Great Lakes system gives easy access to the most fertile section of the continent. The Mississippi and its tributaries drain 1,000,000 square miles of farmland. We have, in addition to 18,000 miles of navigable rivers, a greater coastline available for commerce than has the whole of Europe. New York is the world's greatest seaport. Few mountain ranges hamper the development of transcontinental railroads in this country, and of these, only one, the Rockies, is a serious obstacle to effective transportation. Our railroad mileage is enormous, a half-dozen transcontinental lines being supplemented by numerous smaller roads and feeding lines. We have more than 2,000 miles of canals in operation. Cheap and rapid transportation between the different parts of the country, supplemented by adequate means of communication by telephone, telegraph, and the postal service, undoubtedly has been one of the greatest factors in our national prosperity. 61. Domestic and foreign trade. The great majority of our products are not shipped to foreign markets, but are utilized within the country. We are still so young and so undeveloped a country that our manufacturers have been kept busy supplying the domestic market. This fact, together with the American manufacturers' lack of knowledge concerning the possibilities of foreign trade, explains our neglect of foreign markets. In proportion as our manufacturers catch up with the domestic market, and in proportion as their knowledge of foreign market increases, it is likely that they will give more and more attention to customers in other countries. But though a very small proportion of our products are sent abroad, the foreign trade of the United States exceeds in value the foreign trade of any other country. This predominance is due not so much to our search for foreign markets as to the steady demand in other countries for three classes of goods in the production of which we have a distinct advantage. These three classes of goods are, first, raw materials of which we have a great abundance, such as cotton and copper. Second, specialties invented and patented by Americans, such as inexpensive automobiles, typewriters, and phonographs. And third, commodities which may be advantageously produced by large-scale methods, such as agricultural machinery and the cheaper grades of textiles. 62. Summary and forecast. We have very briefly surveyed some of the basic facts of American industry. On the one hand, the favorable location and the rich natural resources of the United States have furnished a substantial basis for industrial progress. On the other hand, we must note that the American people are energetic and versatile, combining to a happy degree the qualities of initiative and originality, perseverance and adaptability. The great wealth and prosperity of the country as a whole have been the result of the combination of a favorable land and an able people. This is not the whole of the story, of course. It must be admitted that, with all of our wealth, we continue to face serious charges of poverty and industrial maladjustment. These charges are of great importance, but it should be remembered that no problem can be solved or even intelligently attacked until the essential facts are well in hand. We have briefly described the nature of American industry. What we now have to do, as a preliminary to considering the problem of poverty and industrial reform, is to analyze the economic laws in accordance with which American industry has developed. The essential facts of the next 4 chapters cannot be weighed too carefully. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. What is meant by production? 63. Why men work. Ultimately, everyone depends upon work for his living. Young children commonly live upon the earnings of their parents. Most normal adults, on the other hand, depend upon their own efforts for their living. Since every individual probably works because of a combination of motives, it is possible somewhat to analyze the reasons why men work. The most fundamental reason for working is in order to preserve one's life. This assured, the individual is in a position to work in order to preserve the lives of those who are near and dear to him. When the necessities of life have been provided, work is commonly continued for the sake of acquiring comforts or luxuries. Under a well-regulated legal system, these efforts of the individual also benefit the community. But until he is able to support himself and his family, the average individual does not consciously make the public interest the chief end of his labors. However altruistic a man may be, he will not be able to labor consistently in behalf of others, unless he will thereby serve his own interests as well, or unless his personal needs have already been met. 64. The old way of getting a living. The economic history of the 18th century England illustrates two rather distinct methods of getting a living, one of which may be called the old, and the other the new. Up to about the middle of the century, the masses of Englishmen, in common with the people of other countries, got a very poor living. Most common necessities were made in the home, and were purely for family use. Shoes, clothing, tools, and similar articles were produced laboriously on a small scale. In comparison with industrial conditions in the 19th century, there was at that time little industrial cooperation. Footnote. By cooperation is here meant simply the working together of different persons or groups of persons. End of footnote. Little division of labor, little suspicion that men were, in spite of hard work, engaged in for long hours, getting a very poor living. The trouble was, partly, that men had not yet fully realized the possibilities of helping one another, and partly that they were ignorant of how to make nature really an efficient aid in getting them a living. 65. The new way of getting a living. After the middle of the 18th century, the invention of a series of remarkable machines enabled Englishmen greatly to increase their productivity, first in the manufacture of textiles, and later in numerous other industries. By subdividing their labor more and more minutely, and by each specializing in the particular type of work which he could do best, men found that their total output could be greatly increased. This complex division of labor, made possible by the use of water and steam power to run machines and to move vehicles of transportation, reduced the difficulty of getting a good living. That it constituted a veritable revolution in industry. Indeed, this change is known in history as the Industrial Revolution. 66. Effects of the Industrial Revolution. In the last century and a half, the Industrial Revolution has spread to every important civilized country in the world, everywhere encouraging the application of machine methods to more and more industries. This change from production on a small scale, and often by hand, to large-scale production in factories equipped with complex machines has had important results. It has so increased our control over nature that even the humblest workman of today enjoys many comforts denied kings a few centuries ago. On the other hand, the Industrial Revolution has tended to create a numerous class which depends entirely upon wages, and to set off against this class an employing group which possesses and controls most of the income-producing equipment of the industry. The significance of this last development will become clearer as we go along. 67. Nature of modern production. In the study of modern production, two fundamental facts confront us. The first is that the economist does not define production as merely the making of material objects. We desire material objects only if they will satisfy our wants. Since also the satisfaction of wants is the important thing, it is clear that the performance of a service, such as teaching or painting, may be more important than the manufacture of a material object which no one wants. Production may thus be defined as the satisfaction of human wants. The manufacturer of a material object is productive only if that object is wanted by someone. He who supplies personal or professional service is productive if that service satisfies the wants of someone. The second fundamental fact which confronts the student of modern production is the complexity of our industrial system. 300 years ago, most of the commodities in daily use were made, either in the home and by the family members, or by small groups of artisans working together under relatively simple conditions. Today, production is a vast and complicated process. To the eye of the untrained observer, a great mass of factories, farms, railroads, mills, machines, ships, and busy laborers appears without order, and often without purpose. The task immediately before us is to analyze this mass, and to point out the nature of the various factors which contribute to the productive power of a community. 68. Nature a first factor in production. Nature is defined by the economist as inclusive of all of the materials and forces furnished in the form of land and its products, oceans, lakes, rivers, rain, humidity, and climate. Since nature is rather a vague term, and since, also, the economist looks upon land as the most important element in nature, we may lump together all of the materials and forces of nature and apply the term land. Taken in this sense, land is clearly of great importance in production. We build houses and factories upon it. We use it as a basis of transportation. We harness its motive power, and we make extensive use of the innumerable raw materials which it furnishes. Without land, there could be no production, in the sense in which the economist understands the word. 69. Man's labor a second factor in production. Something besides land or nature is necessary before our wants can be satisfied. Nature is often careless of our needs and desires. True, she offers us berries, coal, firewood, and many other commodities which are practically ready to use, but even these articles will not satisfy our wants unless we go to the trouble to secure possession of them. In an important sense, nature is passive, and if she is to furnish us with a living, we must engage in labor. This labor may be mental or physical, the important point being that it is effort undertaken to increase our control over nature. Savages are content to use products in substantially the form in which nature provides them. Civilized peoples work over the products of nature until the utility or want-satisfying power of those products has been greatly increased. Man's living improves as he progresses from indolence to hard physical labor, and then from hard physical labor alone to a combination of physical and mental labor intelligently directed. 70. Capital a third factor in production. Land to furnish raw materials, and man to make use of those materials. What more is necessary? Nothing else would be necessary if all of nature's gifts were readily accessible, and if man unaided could make the best use of them. But nature hides or disguises many of her treasures, and man is physically weak. Hence he has hit upon the device of making tools to help him in his contest with nature. During the period of the Industrial Revolution, many simple tools were supplanted by complicated devices run by power and called engines and machines. To the economist, tools and similar devices are a form of capital, capital being defined as inclusive of everything which man has created, or caused to be created, in order to help in further production. Footnote: land has not been created by man, but is a gift of nature. Land, therefore, is not a form of capital. End of footnote. The fashioning of hammers and saws, the construction of railways, and the manufacture of machinery, all these operations create capital. The systematic creation and use of capital is one of the distinguishing features of modern civilization. The laborer alone can produce little. Aided by capital, he can produce much. Capital is not important if one is willing to live like a savage. On the other hand, it is indispensable if one wishes to enjoy the benefits of civilization. 71. Coordination a fourth factor in production. Land, labor, and capital are factors in production. 200 years ago, nothing else was essential to production. The average individual had his own land, produced his own tools or capital, and relied chiefly or entirely upon his own labor. But the Industrial Revolution enlarged and complicated production. It created an industrial system in which the individual is generally a specialist, producing a surplus of his one product, but dependent upon numerous other persons for most of the things which he personally consumes. Today, for example, there are numerous individuals raising cattle, the hides of which are to be made into shoes. Other individuals are perfecting means of transportation so that those hides may be carried to market. Still other persons concern themselves only with the building of factories or with the manufacture of machines with which to work those hides into shoes. These various individuals and groups may never see each other. Nevertheless, they aid one another. The secret of this often unseen and unconscious cooperation is that there are individuals who specialize in the work of connecting up, or coordinating the other factors which are necessary to the production of shoes. These individuals, about whom we shall have more to say in the next chapter, constitute an important economic group. They coordinate, in the example given above, the cattle grower, the railroad manager, the tanner, the factory builder, and the manufacturer, and thus make possible a kind of national or even international cooperation which would otherwise be impossible. Those whose function it is to promote this cooperation are therefore indispensable factors in modern production. 72. Government a fifth factor in production. A cursory examination of modern industry would convince the observer that land, labor, capital, and coordination are important factors in production. There is, in addition, a factor which is so fundamental and of such essential value that it is sometimes overlooked altogether. This is the work of the government in protecting productive enterprises. Government aids in production by suppressing theft, violence, and fraud, by allowing individuals to engage in helpful businesses, by enforcing contracts entered into legally, and by punishing many kinds of monopolistic abuses. The whole fabric of American prosperity is built upon the foundation of law and order. 73. Summary and forecast. Production, in the economic sense, consists in doing that which will satisfy human wants. Modern production is a vast and complicated process involving the cooperation of 5 factors: land, labor, capital, coordination, and government. In a later chapter we shall find that there are wide differences of opinion as to the relative importance of some of these factors. We shall find, indeed, that the most vital economic problems which confront American democracy depend for their solution upon a clear understanding of the facts stated or implied in this chapter. The student ought not, therefore, to accept hastily the statement that land, labor, capital, coordination, and government are necessary in production, but ought rather to reason out just how and why each is actually helpful in American industry. End of chapter 7.